Hello and welcome to English with Jack. I am delighted you have joined me today to work on your British English comprehension and fluency. My goal is to help you understand English as it is spoken in the real world, moving beyond textbook grammar into natural storytelling. In this lesson, we are going to listen to a story titled The Impossible Invention, which is designed to teach you a very popular idiom, when pigs fly. This phrase is used to describe something that will never happen. By listening to this story, you will improve your ability to talk about skepticism, ambitious dreams, and future possibilities, while expanding your intermediate vocabulary.
Harrison was a man who lived with his head in the clouds. He resided in a small terraced house in the suburbs of Manchester, where he spent nearly all his free time in his garden shed. To his neighbours, Harrison was simply a quiet man who enjoyed tinkering with old engines and scrap metal. However, to his best friend Holly, he was a chaotic genius who rarely finished what he started. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Harrison telephoned Holly and insisted she come over immediately. He claimed he had finally cracked the code on his life's work. Holly, who was busy marking exams for her secondary school students, was reluctant, but eventually agreed. She grabbed her raincoat and an umbrella and walked down the wet pavement to Harrison's house.
When she arrived, Harrison ushered her quickly through the kitchen, past a pile of unwashed tea mugs, and straight out to the shed at the bottom of the garden. The smell of oil and sawdust filled the air. In the center of the room stood a strange object covered by a large grey tarpaulin. Harrison looked incredibly proud of himself, his hands covered in grease and his hair sticking up in every direction. He told Holly that he had invented a device that would change the world of commuting forever. He called it the Hover Velo. It was, according to him, a bicycle that did not need wheels because it used magnetic repulsion to float above the ground. Holly raised an eyebrow, looking at the lumpy shape under the sheet. She asked him if it actually worked, or if this was just another one of his theories. Harrison insisted it was real, but Holly sighed. She told him that she would believe a bicycle could fly on the day that pigs flew. Harrison just smiled, pulled off the cover, and revealed a bicycle with two large metal fans attached to the frame.
The contraption looked less like a vehicle of the future and more like a health hazard. The metal fans were rusty, and there were loose wires hanging from the handlebars. Harrison explained that the fans would create enough downward thrust to lift the frame, while the magnetic coils underneath would stabilize the ride. He claimed that within a year, people would abandon their cars and float down the motorway to work. Holly put on the pair of safety goggles Harrison handed her, feeling quite silly standing in the drizzle. She pointed out that gravity was a rather strict law to break, but Harrison was too busy fiddling with the fuel intake to listen. He poured a small can of petrol into a tank welded to the crossbar and grabbed the starter cord.
With a look of pure determination, Harrison yanked the cord hard. The engine coughed and sputtered before roaring into life with a deafening noise that surely alerted everyone in the neighborhood. The shed windows rattled in their frames, smoke began to pour out of the back of the machine, smelling thick and acrid. The two large fans started to spin, slowly at first, then picking up speed until they were a blur of motion. Harrison shouted something that sounded like "Here we go" over the noise, hopping onto the saddle. He gripped the handlebars tightly, his face full of anticipation, waiting for the liftoff that he had promised would revolutionize transport. However, the laws of physics remained firmly in place. The bicycle shook violently, vibrating against the wet grass, but it did not rise even a millimeter into the air. Instead, it slowly started to dig itself into the mud due to the intense vibration. Harrison revved the engine harder, hoping for a miracle. The noise became unbearable, and a stray piece of metal clattered onto the patio. Holly stepped back, crossing her arms. The bike was certainly making a lot of energy, but none of it was going towards flight. After a minute of chaotic shaking and zero hovering, the engine gave one final loud bang and died completely. Silence returned to the garden, save for the sound of the rain falling on the hot metal. Harrison stared at the smoking machinery, his face smeared with soot. He looked rather like a chimney sweep who had lost his way. He slowly climbed off the saddle, his boots squelching in the muddy hole that the vibrating bicycle had dug. He admitted quietly that perhaps the magnetic field calculations were slightly off. Holly did not want to be cruel, so she decided against saying, "I told you so." Instead, she simply suggested that they go back inside for a nice cup of tea and a biscuit. They walked back up the garden path, leaving the failed invention to cool down in the drizzle under the grey Manchester sky. Inside the warm kitchen, Harrison scrubbed the heavy grease from his hands at the sink while the kettle boiled. He looked rather dejected. He told Holly that he really believed it would work this time, and he had truly envisioned soaring over the traffic jams on the M6 motorway. Holly handed him a mug of tea and told him that it was good to dream, but sometimes physics simply wins. Harrison took a sip and sighed, looking out the window at his shed. Then a familiar spark returned to his eyes. He mentioned that he had been reading about personal jetpacks and thought he could perhaps build one using an old lawnmower engine. Holly laughed out loud. She told him that she would definitely buy a ticket to watch him fly a jetpack, but only on that magical day when pigs finally take to the skies. Until then, she preferred he stick to repairing toasters. And that brings us to the end of our story for today. Poor Harrison and his ambitious hovervelo didn't quite make it off the ground, and Holly remained safely skeptical throughout the entire experiment. Did you notice how we used the phrase "when pigs fly" to talk about something that is impossible? It is a fantastic idiom to use when you want to express that you do not believe something will ever happen. usually in a humorous or sarcastic way. If you enjoyed listening to Harrison's misadventures and want to keep improving your English fluency, please remember to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me create more lessons for you. See you in the next lesson.